Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Liias. I'm a Roman Catholic priest. I live here in the Melrose community, but I'm on the staff of St. Patrick's Church as a senior priest in Stoneham. Our program, Wellsprings of Faith, is a conversation about faith, the journey of faith in a person's life, and the fruit of that faith in their life and in their work, in their following of Christ. Today I want to welcome a relatively new friend. It's the Reverend Nathan Barczi. He is an associate pastor at Christ the King Church in Newton Lower Falls. Formerly also he's on the staff of Cambridge Presbyterian Church, Cambridge, Mass. And he's also one of the fellow speakers. I've mentioned a few times on the show the Thursday morning breakfast group of men, businessmen, and he's now one of the faculty at that august body. Welcome.
Thank you.
To that ministry, and welcome to Wellsprings of Faith.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
As I said in the introduction, this really is a show about a person's journey in faith. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you come to faith in Christ? Or,
Sure.
what's the shape of that journey in your life?
Yeah. So I was raised in the church. I had two parents who were both Christians, raised me in a wonderful
Where'd you grow up?
church. I grew up in Silicon Valley in California.
A long way
so
from
there's
here.
So there is a church there called Peninsula Bible Church that started in Palo Alto, California. It's non-denominational Bible church, which that's sort of like Congregationalist here on the East Coast.
So just starting sort of evangelical church
evangelical, independent in that it's not part of a denomination,
Right.
But they had good relationships with lots of other churches. It was a wonderful church, taught the scriptures very well, great pastors, great community, great job of, kind of helping people to see how they were gifted and called to serve, even as children, right? So just had a real sense of, just a real picture of what the body of Christ could look like. I was surrounded by friends who loved Jesus, and we all loved each other. So I had a fairly idyllic childhood. Really everything I could ask for.
And so your memories are already knowing the Lord as a
I
child.
don't remember a time when I didn't know Jesus as my Savior. And I often say it. I think it seems to me that what this means is that the Lord knew that I needed all the help I could get, right? Like everything was going to have to be in place for me.
Although I've shared the story, actually I just shared it in my previous show I was taping. When I was rector for the church in Malden here, Episcopal Church, and the charismatic renewal was breaking out in the church, and I was very involved in that. And we had a faith-sharing Lenten program to share our conversions. And there were some pretty dramatic conversions out of pretty dissolute lifestyles and addictions and everything. But there were these two sweet little old ladies. They always came to every program I put on in that church. And they were in their 80s. And as we were going around the room, it got to them, and it applied to both of them, but I forget which one of the ones spoke first. And she said, "Oh gosh, I'm really embarrassed. I don't have any conversion story to say." And then she said, "You see, I don't remember a day in my life I didn't know Jesus."
Yeah,
I said, "That's the best conversion
That's right.
story."
I remember telling a friend of mine one time, I wish I had one of these dramatic conversion stories, where I was living this rough life. And his mom overheard us in the other room, and she came barreling in and said, "Don't ever say that. You don't ever wish for a day when you didn't know Jesus."
Yeah, that's right. That's
so.
right. Yeah, just think of all the lives in the desert, the damage done, and all that, the reparation that has to be done literally in all levels, repairing the soul, repairing of lives, and repairing of messes you've made. And, not that Christians don't make messes too.
Right,
but,
of course not.
But there's something about being with the Lord in the mess and without Him.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, back to your childhood.
Yeah. So I grew up in the church, developed a love of the church, the Bible, Scripture, at a very early age. At the same time, Silicon Valley. If you look at the places I've lived in Silicon Valley. I lived briefly in Berlin, briefly in New York City, and then I've lived here.
Cambridge, yeah.
So I've never lived in a place where Christians weren't a minority. I've
Ah,
never
yeah,
lived in a
you
place
never lived
where
in the Bible Belt.
no, and so I've always lived in places where the majority of my friends were not Christians, and where I did have to be ready to answer questions,
Yeah,
and was faced with them. And
interesting.
thankfully, the church I grew up at was very good at answering those questions.
Yeah.
They never said, "Don't ask that." They would say, "We don't know," if the answer was, "We don't know."
Right.
But they always allowed you to explore faith and to allow doubt to be part of a living faith, which I
And
think is
that,
really
and that
important.
if it's typical of a lot of the newer evangelical churches, as
Yeah.
opposed to just old traditional kind of conservative biblical churches, you knew you were a countercultural entity, and
Oh,
and
yes.
so part of the DNA of its understanding of itself and its mission was definitely evangelistic
Absolutely.
and apologetic. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, right,
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so that was something that I
Yeah,
grew up
that's-
with
that's
and
good,
then
yeah.
has carried over into the
Right,
rest of my
right,
life
into
here.
your life now.
Yeah.
So when did you, tell me as you get to these
Yeah,
other
right. How
places,
did-
but from childhood,
Yep.
where did you, what
So
happened?
I stayed in California for college, did my undergrad work at Stanford.
Stanford,
It
yeah.
was
So that was
it was
definitely
then that I lived in
Silicon
Berlin.
Valley,
That
yeah.
was an overseas study
Oh,
program.
overseas study, yeah.
Yeah, and then
And Stanford, like the most elite schools in our country that it is,
Sure.
that's not particularly friendly environment for Christianity either.
No, and in fact, part of my story, we'll get
Yeah.
to this. I had a previous career as an economist. It took me a while to get into ministry,
Ah,
and one of the reasons was that, in considering whether to pursue academic theology, when I looked at the professors in the theology and religious studies department at Stanford, it was very clear that none of them believed any of it, and they thought that it would make you a worse scholar if you did.
you did
So I
believe
think
it.
I had very poor role models
yeah.
of what that could look like, and it probably kept me, and maybe this was a good thing.
And you noticed it. You were aware of that.
Oh,
then.
yes.
See, I was
Yes.
naive when I went to Amherst College, which is one of these
Yeah.
other smaller elite colleges
Yeah.
here in Boston, in
Yeah.
Massachusetts. And same thing. I wanted to be a priest, and I took religion
Yeah.
courses. I didn't know that fundamentally my faith was being deconstructed by these people and destroyed.
Right.
And that was true actually also in seminary, for that matter.
Yeah.
Even after college, but at least you had some resistance. It took me a while to reconstruct my faith after
Yeah.
having had it deconstructed.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I got to the end of college, like I said, I loved studying the Bible. I loved teaching.
Yeah.
I did consider seminary or academic theology, but the bad experience with professors, that kind of pushed me away from the academic side. I didn't think I had the right personality to be a pastor. All the pastors I knew were very gregarious and outgoing. I'm more reserved.
An introvert. Yeah.
But the pastors at my church, people that I went to for advice about this, not just pastors, other leaders, friends, they all said, the Lord can use you really anywhere, right? In any field. I had been studying economics. I had done well. They said, if God's opening doors for you there, go see how you can serve Him in economics.
What drew you to economics in the first place?
What drew it to me in the first place was its interdisciplinary nature. I was one of those kids that liked all of the subjects, right? And so I wanted
And this
something
kind of
where
weaved through it all, huh?
I could use math, I could use, history, political science. Economics kind
that's
of
true,
draws
that's
on lots
true,
of
yeah,
things. So that's what drew me into it at
Yeah.
first. And so I moved to New York to work for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And I was there for 2 years. That's a typical thing to do, to go and do that as a way of getting a taste of research and then applying to grad school. So I did 2 years at the New York Fed, and then I came here to go to MIT for my PhD in economics.
For your PhD at the Sloan School? Is that
Actually, at MIT,
MIT
in the
itself,
Department of Economics.
Economics,
So Sloan is the business school.
Oh, the business
but they
school,
have a
okay.
Department of
Oh,
Economics.
interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've
Yep.
really been at these most elite places, and so how'd your Christian faith survive all that?
Well,
Or was it like strengthened by?
I always found at both Stanford and MIT, at least in the times when I was there, so this would be between Stanford I started in '96 and I finished my PhD in 2007.
Okay.
So in that time, what I experienced was much more indifference to faith than overt hostility. Which I found a little disconcerting. Like I was ready to have, these debates.
Arguments.
Right,
Yeah,
arguments.
debates, yeah.
People didn't really seem to care. Being a Christian was just sort of another thing about you, like your favorite flavor of ice cream.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think it's like that right now as much. If any students are watching this, it's probably not like that as much. But that's how it was.
Yeah,
That's how it was for me. And the other thing I should say is that I was always part of a good church all the way through. So, I was at the same church in California for college, in New York. I asked friends for recommendations, and they said, well, we've heard of this guy named Tim Keller. We hear he's a good preacher. You should go check him out. So I ended up at Redeemer
Wound up, yeah.
for a couple of years. And then I wound up at Christ the King,
in
Cambridge.
Yeah.
And so I always had a very strong faith community around me. And I think that's important.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
And so what was sort of did you go into, after you got your PhD, what you do with that?
I did 7 years.
For the Lord.
7 years, I think it was, 7 years as an economist for a consulting firm called the Brattle Group.
Now, what does an economist do?
Well, what I did, economists do lots of different things.
Yeah.
What I did as an economist is that I would do analysis for intellectual property or antitrust matters. So the lawyers who are representing firms that want to merge with each other, or who are fighting over a patent dispute or something, they'll go hire economists to do a calculation of, so just how much did it damage firm X when firm Y infringed their patent? Or what is the impact on consumers going to be if we let these two oil producers
Now, is that hard
merge?
science or soft science?
It's kind of a mix. It's kind of a mix.
tricky,
We use a lot of data and a lot of mathematical models, and so I had to have that technical side of things. At the same time, economic systems are so complex. You don't have like controlled experiments the same way that you do in physics or chemistry. So it is kind of a hybrid. It's a social science. Yeah.
Wow. Now, in your personal life, I know you have a wedding ring. I assume
Yes,
you're married.
I am married.
When did
Yes.
she show up
I'm
in
glad,
your life?
I'm glad you brought that up. So actually, we grew up at that same church in California.
Oh, okay. So
we've known each other since high school.
Yeah.
We started dating right before I graduated high school, and so had about an 8-year relationship, which at times was long distance because I was on this coast, she was still on the west coast for college. We got married in 2004.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be 19 years this
good,
August.
good.
And we have 3 children.
Ah.
A 14-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, 14-year-old boy, 12-year-old girl, and a 10-year-old boy.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll have to edit that for the final taping.
Absolutely.
Before your daughter sees it.
I know. Yeah, right.
But that's wonderful. I mean, obviously she was a Christian, and
Yes.
this journey, so much of your journey has been together,
Yes.
which is wonderful. So you're not an economist now,
No,
at least
I'm not.
I don't know if you have a part-time moonlighting as an economist.
No,
But
no.
what kind of, how'd that mutate or
Yep.
become transformed into
Yeah.
pastoral ministry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I mentioned, I considered seminary right after college. Always loved studying and teaching the scriptures, theology. I was a pretty serious, avocational theologian, just as a reader. By the time I finished my PhD in economics, I knew that I didn't want to go into an academic career as an economist, which was my original plan. So the consulting job was different from that academic track. And it was actually a wonderful place for me to land. It was a wonderful company. I worked with wonderful people. But by then, I was serving, and my wife as well, both of us were very invested in our church. I had been ordained as a ruling elder. So that's a lay, it's an elder. It's not something that you have a seminary degree for.
Right.
but you're in sort of the governance structure, and you have teaching and shepherding responsibilities alongside of the pastor. So I was serving in that role.
The real word presbyter from the New
Exactly,
Testament.
exactly. So Presbyterian
Really,
refers to that
comes
structure where you
that
have
structure,
elders. That's
yeah.
exactly right. That's exactly right. I was serving in that way. My wife was very invested.
What was her sort of career path before?
So she's a speech and language pathologist by
Ah.
training, and now she's an educator. She works in a kindergarten class, so she is just a genius with 5-year-olds. I'm terrified of 5-year-olds.
It takes a genius to be good with 5-year-olds.
She's amazing. I don't understand how she does this. So her ministry was always with the children in the church. I had the easier job of trying to teach the adults. And we were both very invested in that. And so, I started to sense a calling, for us as a family to shift our lives towards full-time vocational ministry. And it was about a 10-year process, right? So I did that consulting job. While I was working as an economist, I was able to pick up a master's in theology part-time.
Where?
The University of Nottingham in the UK.
Yeah,
so they had a distance MA. It was designed to be distance.
Right.
I did that. I loved it. I did well in it. I had begun speaking to the elders at the church about potentially coming onto the staff in a pastoral role with a focus on teaching and leadership development.
And at this point, your home parish was at Christ the King.
This is still in Cambridge. This is in Cambridge.
Oh, the Cambridge. What was the name of that parish?
Also Christ the King.
Also Christ the King. All right.
Yeah, same
Christ
name.
the King, Cambridge, as opposed to Christ the King, Newton Falls, where you
That's
are
right.
now.
That's
Okay.
right. Yep. And when I finished the master's, I came on to the staff of the church and was also invited to stay on for a doctorate in theology and to do that distance as well. So I could stay here in Nottingham.
So you have there might be a lot of letters after
So I've ended up with 2 PhDs.
PhDs and a few masters
and as you can
in there
tell
too.
from my story, it's more a story of misdirection. It just took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. So that.
Well, you did a lot of things while growing up. Too.
That is how that's how that shift
That's how it
happened.
shifted. And so you took a significant salary cut to become a pastor.
Yes.
So you now live a life of
Yes,
good
thankfully,
evangelical poverty, we call it in the Catholic Church.
So thankfully, I think this might be good advice in general. My wife and I, we knew that this might be in the cards fairly early, and so we were pretty deliberate about not changing our standard of living dramatically while I had the more lucrative salary. And so it wasn't as
well.
hard
All
of a
John
discussion.
Wesley, who's one of my heroes, said, make as much money as you can, work as hard as you can, to make as much money as you can, so that you can give away as much as you can.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and live for the Lord.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
so what's your work and what's the most
Yeah.
exciting parts of your ministry now?
Yeah, so today I wear 2 hats. You mentioned the one. I'm associate pastor at Christ the King Church in Newton, which was planted by the one in Cambridge. So I've been in Newton now for a bit over 2 years.
Yeah.
And I have a focus on preaching and teaching. So the senior pastor and I, we preach every other week, which has been really good. Even just for the 2 of us. Our styles are very different. We learn a lot from each other.
Well, it takes a lot of mutual respect and especially for the senior pastor to share his pulpit equally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we have been. He was he was a college minister at Harvard when I first arrived here, and so we've known each other for quite a while. Have a very good friendship, and
good.
Yeah, we love filling the pulpit together. I also focus on adult education, leadership development, training new elders and deacons in the church.
Great.
That's my main focus there. And I would say, being a minister at any church in this city means, teaching people how to live as a people on mission and in exile and in a place where, again, Christianity is the minority.
That's right.
And you're asking yourself, okay, so from that minority position, how do we bless this city? How do we honor God and bless this city? And so you look to these passages in Jeremiah, and you look at Daniel and as sort of models of what these look like.
Right.
But translating that into a modern culture is a challenge. So that's the exciting part of that. The other hat that I wear, I'm also a chaplain at MIT.
Ah,
Almost 3 years ago, I helped start a Christian Study Center, which is an independent organization. So we're an MIT chaplaincy, but we are independent of MIT.
you're not paid by MIT.
Not paid by MIT. So it's a little bit like,
University. or
university,
something, right,
exactly.
exactly.
It's
You
very
have to
similar
raise
to
your
that.
own, but they're welcoming you to be part of
Exactly.
the team, and they have a nice chapel center, I know,
Yes,
where all
yes.
the chaplains hang out.
Yes, and my work is predominantly with faculty and staff, although we partner with students and a lot of alumni also.
yeah.
And the mission of the Study Center, we really believe, we're kind of animated by this belief that the Christian gospel is something which can help MIT to do its own mission better. That if MIT is pursuing human flourishing, and is tremendously powerful and effective in the ways that it can do that with science and technology, the Christian gospel can enhance that mission because it can supply an ethical framework. It can supply space to ask questions of meaning and purpose, and not just how do we do things, but what should we do and why. And so we try to come alongside of MIT scholars.
And would you
to
say
that end.
that has a lot of success?
So
As
far,
opposed to your experience in the old days of apathy.
So that's a great question. That's a great question. Yes, so I would say MIT is a place, I think the culture of MIT is one which is naturally curious and open to having interesting
Anything.
conversations about anything.
Yeah.
And MIT as an institution knows that the technologies that it's developing have tremendous human impact, right? They know that gene editing, artificial intelligence, all of these different technologies are going to impact everybody. And I think they actually welcome multiple perspectives, conversations about how should we use these things. So we actually have enjoyed so far a pretty warm welcome on that front. And the other thing that we've been working on, which is separate but has become very important, the other thing is that MIT is a place where certain conversations are hard to have because of just the political climate of Cambridge, of MIT. We've been able to open up space to have kind of roundtable dinner discussions with speakers on topics like identity, politics, and race, the fall of Roe v. Wade, and what comes next, questions about human sexuality and technology, the intersection between faith and mental health. So these are all questions that are difficult to have in a place like MIT. And they have been warmly welcomed, including by MIT administrators. So we've had the head of DEI, we've had the head of MIT Medical take part in these conversations, and it's been very encouraging.
And they've been civil and courteous and respectful.
Yes, that's the goal.
Yeah,
that's
the
really why
challenging
we're
part.
doing it.
It's I've always, I've been around the Boston area pretty much my whole life, and interfacing one way or another with MIT. Of course, I have a very personal interface. My wife worked at MIT, but she worked out in Lincoln Lab for 30 years.
Oh, she did?
She's a mathematician
know that.
and worked scientific program.
Yep.
But her primary campus of operation was Lincoln Lab.
there,
But,
right. Sure.
but I still get our health care and everything is still provided by MIT.
Yeah.
And but of course, being married to a scientist and being a priest was always an interesting dynamic and dialectic. Hopefully it worked. It has worked for 53 years.
Wow.
But I've always noticed, I was at Church of the Advent for a while, which is on Beacon Hill. We had a lot of MIT folk. I've gotten to know a lot of people who have ministries at MIT through university, navigators, Kelly Madden and the Fellows Program.
Right.
And I have found, I've always been interested, maybe because I'm married to a scientist, this relationship between science and faith. And I've just found that MIT's been a very fertile area, perhaps more than other schools. I mean, other schools, they're either off partying, hedonism, or even more kind of overt kind of skepticism of faith. But seems to be it's always been it's sort of a creative mix,
Yes.
and I think, and that's been a little my experience
Yeah.
from outside.
There's always been a strong Christian community
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
You know, as I meet with alumni,
Yeah.
you know, the current, I have to mention him, Kevin Ford, who you might know.
No, I don't.
He heads up the Graduate Christian Fellowship as part of InterVarsity. He's been there, I'm going to get this wrong, it's either 38 or 36 years,
okay.
but whichever
A
it
life's
is,
work.
he is an institution.
Yeah.
And so as you meet alumni, they all know Kevin Ford. And there's always been a strong community. You know, Park Street has played a role at
That's
different
right, Park
times.
Street, yeah.
And then, you know, I think being a science and engineering focused school, you just have this mindset of there is objective truth. First of all, there is truth. We can perceive it with our minds. And then an openness to have conversations about, you know, even different ways of accessing truth.
Well, it's interesting because in many ways, at least
Yeah.
from an epistemological point of view,
Yeah.
you're really talking about the fundamental Christian basis of science. You know,
Well, yes, yeah.
you know, as we would say as a church. No, wait a minute. It's not science. Science essentially grew out of it. You know, it had Greek
Right.
origins and other. But the fundamental idea that there's an ordered universe
Right.
and a logic and a comprehensibility and an intelligibility
Right, exactly.
is a Christian understanding of the universe.
Right.
And so it becomes a really important dialectic.
Yes.
So you have basically two jobs.
Yep, I'm about 50-50 between those
50-50,
two
that's
in
great.
terms of my
Sounds like
time.
an
and
exciting
Yeah.
challenge. So,
Yeah.
so now that you're in adulthood and you found what God wants you to do,
I think so, at least for now. At least
I mean, just share some of your own vision about in the culture we're in the cultural crisis we're in, and all the things that assault us. What's your own hope and vision and for being a Christian leader at this time?
Yeah, yeah. I think that now is a great time to be in Christian ministry.
Yeah.
I think that because I think that there is a real sense that people have that the center is not holding, you know, that all is not well, that all of our rationality has not saved the world and looks like it's not going to. You know, I think the danger, you see people realizing, okay, I need to pursue something spiritual, and if they don't have anyone offering out the truth of the gospel, they'll go for anything.
That's right.
Right, and there's all kinds of different directions.
Right.
So I think that the challenge for Christians is to get in there and to offer the gospel and say, here is something, you know, which is not irrational. You know, we're not asking you to drop rationality, like you just said.
Right.
You know, we're not asking you to drop the idea of an ordered universe and the power of science.
Right.
But that there is something transcendent and eternal that it's all pointing to beyond itself.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful image. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's precisely because things are fracturing, falling apart suddenly.
Yeah.
In a way, Christianity in the early church was the Roman Empire was crumbling, and Christendom, as I said, emerged out of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we could have
Okay.
another hour of all kinds of conversations. But thank you so much,
You're
Nathan,
so welcome.
for sharing your life and
Yeah.
your story here. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with the Reverend Nathan Barczi. Again, he is a pastor of Christ the King Church in Newton, Lower Falls. Also shares in a ministry at MIT and the rich dynamic of the ministry center that's there. So ways to connect with him. Thank you very much, and God bless.